Hi guys, it's the Literary Prepper back with you again. Just trying to make a really quick video while my little boy is still asleep, because that's pretty much the only time that I actually get to make videos is when he's taking a nap. Wanted to sort of talk about a few different things that are sort of happening in our society at the moment. When I say our society, I mean the West at the moment. So this is sort of, it started out in American universities, and you can sort of feel this this insidious kind of creep throughout every aspect of society at the moment. Before I sort of get any further, before I forget, if you guys want to make sure that you don't miss out on any content or videos or whatever, make sure you hit the subscribe button and hit the little bell next to it, because otherwise you won't receive notifications. So if you want notifications, hit the little bell next to the subscribe. So if you had have asked me when I was sort of in high school, or probably even up until a couple of years ago, what my political views were, I definitely would not have said that I had any capitalist sympathies. I think realistically, there's not really anybody out there who is of a normal mindset who wants to see people suffer. Old people should be taken care of, disabled people should be taken care of, and anyone else who otherwise is unable to look after themselves within a civilized society ought to be taken care of by other people around them who are fit to go out and work and produce, etc., etc. However, I can also see the other side of it, where if you work really, really hard, then you should also see the profits from your earnings. And it's not fair that one person does a lesser job or a less dangerous job or works less hours and still receives the same amount, because then there's no incentive to work harder. And obviously that sort of drive to work and achieve is what drives our society, rather than in many communist societies it's the fear of punishment, which is not a good way to live. At the moment we have a problem where a lot of things are being fantasized about and sort of twisted to manipulate the general public. And I'll sort of give a few examples of that in a minute. But what I want to do is talk to you guys about all of this from the perspective of Animal Farm by George Orwell. If you have never read this book, go out, buy it, read it. I always say buy books, because books are another asset that you guys can have. If you own it, then you don't have to put up with yucky library germs. But if you own it, then you can always go back to the bookshelf, pick it up and reread it if you missed something, or if you just want to refresh your memory on exactly what it is. They look pretty on a shelf. There's really no negative to owning a book. This one, I think I paid about $17 for it many years ago. I think I might have bought this in 2006 or 2007, but it's still just as valuable today as it was back then. So if you're looking at assets or whatever, buy books. That's always my big thing, buy books. So there will be a few spoilers, so if you haven't read the book, then this is your spoiler warning. Do with that what you will. If you want to sort of continue on, then do so. If not, then maybe just pause this and put it aside, go out and read the book or listen to an audiobook version or whatever your sort of thing is, and then come back. But this book was written in what I feel is a very similar sort of, what do you call it, emotional state to where our society is at the moment. So at the moment we can see that there are big gaps forming between people who have money and people who have less money. From what I hear just from people that I speak to or friends that I have on Facebook or whatever, there are a lot of people who are starting to imitate the kind of thoughts and feelings that were around before the Soviet rise in Russia. And it's really, really not a good place to be in. So just to give you a little bit of sort of history with that, very, very rough history. So you had the Tsar of Russia who was in charge of everything, and like a king sort of person. The people were starving, and there were a number of things with their society that they didn't like, and those without money, the poor people, looked to those who had money and said, we want what you have. It's not fair that you have more than us. And that was when the Bolshevik Revolution took place. So they killed the Tsar and his family, you know, very classy people. They also killed his children. Anyway, I don't have any tolerance for people who do anything against kids. I think that's just the most ballless, low thing that you can do is to attack women and children, unless they're feminists. But I'll get back to that. So they got rid of the Tsar, and you know, then sort of people like Lenin and Trotsky, they started to sort of implement all of these hardcore sort of socialist and communistic ideas throughout the society. The people were no better off. The people were still starving, and the people were still facing violence. It was probably worse because, you know, these people were now sort of being forced into, you know, an even more sort of the government owns everything and you will do what we say sort of line of thinking. They just replaced one totalitarian order with another totalitarian order. And, you know, the people were no better off. So, George Orwell wrote this, published it, just after World War II. So he had a really good sort of seat to sort of stand back and analyse the rise of the Soviets and then everything that happened with World War II and the Germans, who also had a very sort of similar thing where their people were in a state where their economy was collapsing and they were starving, and the Nazi Party came along and promised them that everything was going to be better and they were going to fix everything that was wrong with the world. And all the people these days, especially younger people, they don't understand how it is that somebody like Hitler came to power. It didn't happen overnight. And it didn't happen because people saw this, you know, evil dude with the, you know, devil horns and a little tail that decided to, you know, take government or whatever. That's not how it happened. It was little promises of, we will make it better, we will make it better, we will make it better. Just like what we're seeing now with all of this crap to do with equality and, you know, gender issues and, you know, safe spaces in universities and, you know, all this welfare promising bullshit. Who do you know, I'll get back to that. Okay, so that's how, you know, these people come to power, is that they promise and promise and promise, and then when the promises start to wear thin, they get violent. And then it's, okay, so now we're going to force you to see things our way. And that's what Animal Farm is. So it's, you know, one of the pigs turning around to the animals and saying, It's not fair that the farmer has more than we have, and we do all of the work, and we don't have as good a lifestyle. He lives in a house, he eats all of our food that we produce. We want what he has. And when the old pig dies, the other pigs that take over, Snowball and Napoleon, they effectively kick the farmer out of his house. If we're talking about today's terms, that would be the left wanting to get rid of anyone who is a white male, or anyone with capitalist sympathies, or anyone who is pro-democracy. And they force him to leave, and then their regime takes over. And the left is a regime. Don't sort of be under any false pretenses about that. The left is a regime. So they come into power, and of course the animals initially are very happy because they're being promised more and more, and they're working really hard to try to meet this goal to create their own sort of little utopia sort of thing. But it doesn't happen, and the pigs get greedier and greedier, and they basically get to the stage, sort of skipping ahead a number of different events, get to the stage where they start doing things like they alter the laws to start suiting their actions. And we can see this at the moment, where a lot of people in America are sort of complaining that the gun laws are being changed, which alters their Second Amendment rights. And it's under the guise of protection for the greater public, because they want to cite all these different sort of gang violence issues and high school shootings and all that jazz. They want to say that if they take the guns away, then there won't be any violence. Well, what these people also don't realize is that the people who are committing these acts, particularly the high school shootings, they're under the influence of some pretty serious antipsychotic, antidepressant drugs that have all sorts of side effects that people don't want to sort of discuss. It's not the issue with the pharmaceuticals, it's an issue with the guns. So, okay, let's say that we do take the guns away. Well, that's what they did in Australia after the Port Arthur massacre. And we still have gun violence. It's not, on the level that it is in America, but it still exists. It was only last year that, that last sort of gun issue sort of came about, and it was because of a man who had psychological issues who decided to take it out on his family. That was the last big one that was in the news. So again, a guy with a mental disorder who has taken a gun that he, I think he legally owned it, and taken that out on his family. If you look up the shooting statistics for Australia, the last actual shooting in a high school was in 2012. Nobody was injured. It really didn't make news because it was kind of, this girl took a gun to school and started shooting it, but she didn't hit anyone. And that was, very hush-hush, we don't talk about it. Only recently, sort of, again, going back 1 or 2 years, out West Queensland, there was a student who brought a gun into the high school and threatened teachers. We don't like to talk about it in Australia because we're not supposed to have gun violence after the gun amnesty, and that's just a load and a half. The point is that the bad guys that you need to protect yourself from will always find a way to get a hold of some kind of weapon. Now, I'm not saying that we need to bring back, guns for all citizens in Australia because, frankly, we don't have the history and we don't have the, training available at this point in time to properly train everyone. But, it is just another way they twist the truth to suit their own propaganda. So anyone who lives in Sydney and Melbourne probably, you know, has a better sort of chance of hearing about gun violence on the news. And again, you know, we sort of, around where we are, every now and then you hear of someone's house being shot up with a drive-by, and then it's very quickly swept under the rug. We don't speak of it again. We've mentioned it once, and we're going to sweep it under the rug. So yeah, getting back to Animal Farm. So the pigs, and in Canada at the moment, they're talking about forcing people to use different pronouns when they're sort of talking to people who don't want to identify as either a male or a female. Now, that infringes on their free speech. If you're forced to refer to somebody under punishment of law, that's altering the way that you speak. So, you know, in many ways, George Orwell was right on a number of fronts. And if you haven't read 1984, and if you haven't read Animal Farm or any other writing by George Orwell, go down to your local bookstore or jump online, or, you know, however it is that you buy your books, and get a hold of them and read them. Really, really important if you want to understand what, you know, could potentially happen here, because it's happened before and history is cyclical. So, you know, if it's happened before, it can happen again. And that's another thing that people really want to pretend isn't a thing, is that, oh, it's happened in the past, we're done with it, it can never happen again. That's so not true. If it's happened before, it's almost certain to happen again. So there's all sorts of different things you can point to where laws are being altered to force people to comply with, you know, all of this stupid nonsense that is coming out, which started as a lot of the particularly gender politics that we're talking about these days. It started out as a way to analyze language. It came from, you know, the linguistics department at a university, and some academic idiot has gotten a hold of it and tried to apply it to society. And along with, you know, the civil rights movement, it's just snowballed into we have to accept absolutely everyone and everything no matter what. And really, I think, you know, once we got to a stage where, you know, people of colour and, you know, people of different sort of religions and races and whatever, once we got to a stage where we said, you know, we're all equal, you will be paid the same, you can, you know, act the same, we will do, you know, whatever we can to try to make your lives, you know, comfortable, as long as you work for that, then that's where we should have stopped. And instead, you know, every generation that, you know, pops up wants to fight their own war, and there's nothing left to fight except that we go around the roundabout one more time, and we bring it all back to the beginning, and we wind up with the pigs taking over the farm. And in this case, it is the, you know, feminazi movement. It is the leftist movement who want to say everyone is equal. It's only a matter of time before, well, you can already see it with feminists, where they're saying that women should be compensated, or that different races should be compensated. And it's very quickly becoming, you know, you can see it when you look at, you know, job ads. When you look for a job, they say, oh, you can only apply if you were this particular race. You can only apply if you were this particular gender. That's discrimination. They call it positive discrimination. There's nothing positive about any form of discrimination. And that's why, you know, right back when we started trying to smooth all of this out, we said, like, we want everyone to have an equal opportunity. We're getting to the stage where some are more equal than others. So, When the pigs decide to take over the farm, through different events, one pig winds up sort of killing the other pig that could be seen as opposition to, well, Napoleon kills off Snowball, and basically sort of says, you know, there's no reason to vote because, you know, you all know that what I'm doing is the best way of doing things, so, you know, your opinion no longer counts and this is what we're doing. And basically through, you know, that sort of do as I say kind of attitude, we wind up with a character, Boxer, the horse, who is an avid believer in this movement. Like, you know, he is willing to just work and work and work to try to make this thing work because he believes in the idea. And when I was younger, you know, I sort of, you know, was very much a fan of the idea of this whole John Lennon idea of, you know, imagine, you know, basically that, you know, we have the perfect world sort of thing. If you haven't heard that song, Imagine by John Lennon, it pretty much sums up the hippie movement. But you can't have a world like that. It's a fantasy. And it eventually kills Boxer, and the pigs sell him to the glue farm, or the glue factory rather. So that's what his reward was for working himself literally to the point where he died working for the greater good as far as he was concerned, and then they sold him for glue. That's how much he meant to them. So just keep that in mind if you sort of have any of these leftist sympathies, you will wind up being sold for glue. So where do we go from here? I don't know where we go from here because I already see them turning on themselves. You can already see that people like the original thinkers like Germaine Greer, you can liken them to Snowball, or you can liken them to the old pig that, you know, died at the very beginning of the book, but they're already turning on their own because they have their own personal agenda, and you know, they don't want anyone to get in the way of that. And it's absolutely disgusting. What they are pushing for now is not equality. And, you know, we had the situation in Australia, that the year before last, where the government released a plebiscite. Now, if you don't know what a plebiscite is, it's where the government basically puts out basically like a national sort of opinion poll sort of thing. A plebiscite is not supposed to be legally binding. It's just to get an idea of, you know, how people feel about an issue. The government put out a plebiscite to see how many people were pro or anti the idea of gay marriage. And of course, you know, there were a lot of people who didn't, and this is completely voluntary, a lot of people who didn't vote because they thought it's just an opinion poll. Why should I bother? There were a lot of people who tried to warn the others and said, please vote no because you don't know what you're voting for. And then there were others who said, oh, but I have, you know, gay friends and gay family members, and I want to see them be happy, and I want to see them, you know, be able to marry a partner of their choosing, which, you know, is a, you know, very noble sort of way to vote. But the government turned around after the results of that plebiscite came in, and they changed the laws without having a referendum, without doing any further research. They've looked at the results of that plebiscite, which, you know, there was a very, very small portion of the country that actually said yes. When you take out the chunk of the population who said no, when you take out the chunk of the population who didn't vote, it was only about I think it's 4 or 5 million people who said yes, like an adamant yes, and they acted on that. So I don't know what kind of democracy acts out of the voice of a minority, but it's not any sort of democracy that I have ever come across in anything that I have ever studied. Democracy is not about pleasing the minority. Now, what they have done with this is not just legalize gay marriage. If it was just that, then nobody would care, because realistically, what two people do on their own is completely up to them. But what they have done is, with that, they have started to sneak in all this stuff with what they call safe schools, which is forcing children, little sort of early primary school age children, to be exposed to all these different concepts to do with sexuality and sexual preference and sexual it's like a sex ed sort of class on steroids. Some of the things that they are talking to these children about are not appropriate to be talking to teenagers about, but they want everyone to be over-sexualized, and it truly is disgusting. They are forcing little kids to choose whether or not they want to be a boy or a girl. Now, we are talking about kids who from day to day may believe that they're a pony, or may believe that they're an astronaut, or may believe that, whatever else that little kids believe. But they are forcing them to choose like an adult gender identity, and then trying to reaffirm that within that child. So you wind up with, really young kids, really young kids, who are then put onto all sorts of hormone blockers, and you're looking at young girls who, are getting double mastectomies and all the rest of it. You've got to be like 21 before you can get like a boob job to make them bigger. But if you want to cut them off completely, then, as long as you say that you want to be a boy, we'll just go ahead and mutilate the kid permanently. We'll sterilize them, before they're actually at an age of consent. Now, that to me is not something that should be allowable in an educated, democratic society, because, there's a reason why these kids can't vote. The voting age in Australia is 18. The drinking age in Australia is 18. Why is it that these people are forcing, lifelong permanent changes that expose them to things like cancer at a young age? And I absolutely do not believe that it has anything to do with equality or, anyone's rights or whatever. It's the same issue with particularly boys being drugged up to their eyeballs with all sorts of pharmaceuticals, being labelled with all sorts of hideous things like, ADD or ADHD. Fine, there may be some people out there who are genuine cases, but I do not believe that all of them are. I think that we are getting to a stage where these people want to eliminate particularly all white males. I believe that these people want to, the males who are left over, they want to ingrain in them this, like sense of victimhood, so that they are easily manipulated and they are this perpetual sort of adolescence, so that they never grow up. And that's not healthy at all, and that's where I see all of this going, and I don't know what their end game is. You can only guess at what they've done over the last few years, what their end game is. So if you genuinely want to educate yourself about what is coming, then buy this book, read this book. So yeah, all I can sort of say is invest in your own education, like a genuine education, not this leftist crap that is being driven through schools. If your child is at a school where that is their main drive, pull them out because they're being brainwashed and damaged, and is not healthy. The suicide statistics are terrifying at the moment because these people are working their way into people's psyches and they are destroying them. So I don't know if this is some sort of ploy to, basically get the population under control or whatever it is, but it looks like a very, very sick form of eugenics, what they're doing now. So all I can sort of advise you guys to do is to try to avoid being part of the problem. Make sure that you stock up on enough supplies so that if something does happen and these people do stage an all-out takeover, then we are ready. Yeah, stay safe, guys, and make sure that if you found this useful or whatever, like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. If you have any comments or questions, pop them down below. I know this one was a little bit heavy. I'll try to make the next one a little bit lighter, but something serious is coming, and the writing is already on the wall. You just have to open your eyes and see it. On that delightful note, I'll talk to you guys later.